Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of T-Dog RC. And in this video, this is part 2 of the Blob build. And we're going to be finishing the wings off. So got the servos to put in the wings. And then we've got to glue the wings together, which is going to be a bit of a milestone, I suppose. And then once we've glued the wings together, we've then got to start work on the fuselage, and we've got to get the fuselage sides fastened onto the wings because it's a permanent fixture, fuselage to the wings. So without further ado, let's get on the bench and let's get stuck in. Right, so what I've decided is I'm not going to use a single aileron servo with torque rods. Mainly because if you read the instructions, it's actually you've got to cut a slot for the aileron servo, you've got to bend the torque rods to the right sort of shape, get the 90-degree bend in them. You've then got to cut slots in the wing for the torque rods to go, you've got to drill holes in the ailerons, etc. So it's actually quite a lot of work, and I think it's probably easier just to stick some little servos in the wings. Obviously when this plane was designed, you couldn't get servos this small, so that's fair game. So what I've decided to do is use these little sort of 11-gram servos. I think they are. They're metal geared digital servos. I'm going to put them in the bottom of the wings, so obviously need to make sure I don't go and cut a hole in the top. And then I'm going to position them probably about here, like that. So it's not going to be right in the middle, because I want to have a bit of lead coming out the end, and then put them kind of like in the middle of the chord, as it were, so about there, like that. So essentially all I need to do is draw around that and cut a slot out, hopefully make it a nice tight fit, and then glue those into position. But obviously before I glue them, I need to just drill a hole through the core of the wing so I can get my cable through. So I'm going to crack on with that now. So first thing I'm going to do is just measure where I'm going to put this, and that is 19 centimeters. And then and that's 10 centimeters basically from the trailing edge of the aileron. So if I just make a note of that. In fact, what I'll do is I'll draw around that, and then let's double check that was 19. Yep. And then I'll just do the same on this one, so then I know we've got them both in the same place. Just make sure that's definitely upside down. So we go 19 which is there, and then we said 10 which is going to be there. Okay, yep. So I'm going to draw around this one. So I'm just going to check that there. Yep, that's right. Yep, that's perfect there. Okay, so just draw around this one. Okay. And then we'll get the knife out and we'll start cutting. Okay, I'm just going to do it with my knife because there's no point in sort of getting a Dremel, I don't think, because obviously it doesn't need to be very big. So we'll just cut this out using the knife. Okay, let's just try that now then. Probably needs a bit more, I think. Yeah, I need to cut some out for the actual servo arm there as well, which I've forgotten about. So we'll just cut a bit more around there. Okay, that's gone in there really nice, as you can see, really nice and flat. And I've tested it, made sure that it's central, the servo arm and everything. And this may prove to be a bit of a mistake, but I've actually gone ahead and I've used some foam tack and fastened that into place. Because basically what I'm planning on doing is, because this is the underside of the wing anyway, and I've put a channel in here to get the cable in the lead nice and flush, and then I'm just going to cover over this whole thing and just cut a little slot in the covering for the servo arm, and I think that will be absolutely fine, and then you'll hardly even see it. But I can't do that on the other side because I've got to join the wings together, and then I've got to slide it into the fuselage. So I'm going to have to wait until I've got the wing into the fuselage and then put that servo in. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to, because I can only slide it one way. So I've got to get the fuselage past the point where the servo is before I actually put the servo in, if that makes sense. Otherwise I have to cut a little slot in the side of the fuselage for that to go through, which obviously I don't want to do. But I'm going to get that hole done, and then once that's done, we're on to joining the wings together. Okay, so next big job is to glue the wings together. And basically what it says in the instructions is just to put them upside down and then epoxy them together. There's not much else you can do really. You've obviously just got to make sure that they're nice and flat and that the seam lines up, so it's, you know, that they're sort of all square. The facings are really nice and square the way they've been cut, so that's good. And I've got my board here, which is made from plasterboard or gypsum or drywall, wherever you're from. And so this is extremely flat. And then I've just put these two down as a bit of a reference as well. These two cutting mats with the centre line there. So I'm going to get some epoxy mixed up. And I'm just going to use 5-minute epoxy for this. Reason being is I literally just want to hold it steady whilst it dries, or at least while it goes off enough for me to kind of leave it to do its own thing. But then when I do the bandage, because there's a glass bandage that goes around this, once you've put the fuselage sides on, I'll use 30-minute epoxy for that. So let's get a decent mixing stick. So I've got some Zap 5-minute epoxy, which is good stuff. We don't want loads because I've just got to put a sort of thin layer on the roots of the wings really. So that's the resin. We'll add the hardener. This is so much nicer to get out now it's warmed up a bit here in the UK. When it was cold, this is really difficult to squeeze out. So I don't want that getting any epoxy on it. Okay, let's go. So spread this right the way along. That's that side done. And we'll get some on this side. As long as it's on one side really, that should be alright, because you don't want it splurging out all over the place anyway, so you only want a thin sort of layer, because this is really just to initially hold them together, and then obviously once you put the bandage on, that's where the real strength comes in. Okay, let's go for it. So I think we'll initially just put it together like this, rub it around so we know it's on both surfaces. Okay, And then we'll push them together, make sure they're lined up. It does say as well to do it upside down, and that's so you can get this flat bottom lined up obviously easier than you would the other side. Okay, and all I've got to do now is stand here for the next 5 minutes while this goes off, and I won't film that because I don't think it's going to be very interesting. Okay, so it's the next day and the wings are glued together. Very nice they are too, perfectly straight, nice and square, so they've gone together really well. What I've done is I've just put a little bit of this Deluxe Materials Model Light filler just in a few areas where I've just got a couple of scratches and things, and annoyingly on this leading edge I must have dinted it slightly just on this right hand panel, so I've just put a little bit of filler in there, obviously waiting for that to go off and then I'll sand it down. So I'm just going to put these to one side for a few minutes whilst I now start looking at the fuselage. So these are the fuselage sides, really thin 1/16 ply I think it is. I've already marked them up, so I've got a right hand side and a left hand side. There's a few little jobs to do. Now normally with building a plane you would get the fuselage put together, you'd get the formers glued in and get it all square etc on the bench, and then you'd slide the wings in. But with this blob build it's a bit different. You actually slide the fuselage sides onto the wing with no formers and then glue these fuselage sides to the wing, and that kind of gives you the profile of the fuselage basically. And then once you've done that you then slot the formers in afterwards, so it's a bit of a different way of doing it. And one of the things I've got to do is, this is obviously meant for an engine, so on here, I'll show you this one's probably better, I've marked where the firewall goes, and then your engine sits here, and there's like a balsa block that sits underneath that you have to shape and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not putting an engine in, I'm just going to put an electric motor in, so I'm actually going to use my razor saw and just cut along that front line there, so the firewall is going to be flush with the front of the plane basically, and I'll just bolt the motor on the front, nice and simple. So it's not going to have a shaped front or anything like that, but the motor will just be there, so keeps it, yeah, just keeps it nice and simple. So that's one of the jobs I've got to do. Got to cut those off, and then I think I've got to put some triangle section on before we put these onto the wings, and then once I've done that then I've got to sort of slide them onto the wings, make sure I'm happy with them, and then get them glued into place. So going to start by cutting these. Oh, the other little tip it gives you actually, which I'm going to do in the instruction manual, is it says now before you put these on, if you're going to cover the model with film, which I am, like heat shrink film, it's a good idea to take one of these and make yourself a template. It says, you know, you could draw around the film ready. I'm actually just going to get some cardboard and just draw around this and make myself a template, so then when I come to cut the film, because obviously the fuselage is stuck to the wings, it's going to be quite tricky to cover, but because you've already got this template you can kind of just slide the film over and then iron it on. It should work quite well, so I'm definitely going to make sure I do that. So yeah, going to get these cut and then we'll have a look what's next. Right then, I've cut off the fronts. I'll keep these, you never know, they might come in handy. So shorten the fuselage obviously, and then as I've said, that former's going to go there, so that will, sorry, the firewall's going to go at the end, so that will form the front of the model. Make sure I've got a right hand and a left hand. Not going to make that mistake again after the nap build. And then next job, oh, the other thing I've done is I've cut myself this cardboard template of one of the fuselage sides, so as I said I can use that for cutting out my film covering when I come to cover it at the end. So next job is just to get this 6mm triangular section glued onto the fuselage. So I'm going to start with the right hand one, and it goes right along the whole length of the fuselage basically, top and bottom, So just need to make sure I stick that on the right way, so that's going to go on like that. It does say in the instructions to use epoxy to put this on, but I'm just going to use some thin CA. Hopefully that'll be fine. So yeah, should be fairly straightforward to put on because it is very thin, so it should bend quite easily. So I don't think I'm going to have to score it or anything like that to get it round. There's only really this bend along the top that's potentially going to be a bit tricky, but shouldn't be too bad. So we'll make a start, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the front of this triangle up with the edge of that where the firewall is going to go. So that's going to mean that I can butt the firewall up against the triangle section there, and then basically we'll just follow the profile of the fuselage side, and I'll tack it in in a couple of places, and then once I'm happy with it I'll run the CA right the way along. But with the thin CA it goes off so quick, especially if you just use a small amount. It's almost like pinning it. Well, except it's a bit more permanent. There's a nice straight run along the bottom, so fairly straightforward. That seems to be holding that quite nice, so I think that's going to be fine. We'll just secure this last section in place. I shall get the razor saw and we'll just cut this last piece off flush with the back, like that. Yeah, that's gone on nice. So what I can do now is I will just get some thin CA and run that right the way along. Okay, that bottom section's gone on nice, so next job is to get the top on. And what I'm going to do with this, I think, is get this little piece glued on first here on the front, because it's quite a, well, there's more of a curb, so I'll get that bit glued on and then try and run one piece down to there. It's end grain obviously at this piece, so it does go soak in really nice. And then we'll just bend that round and get that tacked in there. And then the plan is just to go with one big piece all the way along, because it's pretty bendy, this triangle, because it's quite thin. So let's get that tacked in there. And then let's see. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'll get that finished off, I'll get the other side done, and I'll show you the results. Okay guys, we're making good progress. So we've got all of the triangle fastened on, both sides of the fuselage, and I have got this fuselage side on. And what I've done, in the instructions it says to epoxy it in place, which I'm going to do, but I've just tacked it with a couple of tiny little blobs of this thick CA. Don't want to use thin CA because that could eat into the foam in the wing, but just a couple of blobs and then hit it with the activator just to make it go off. Just so I'm happy that it's perfectly lined up. And what I had to do was draw some, try and get this so you can see it, draw some lines on the wings as per the instructions, and you use the top hatch, which is this piece here, to sort of measure where the lines need to be, and it works out at 28 mils either side of the centre line of the wing. So I've measured that, put the lines down, and then that's perfect then for the way the top hatch fits on, and it will leave me some material to sand as well, just to round the edges off a little bit. So next thing I've got to do, I did have a little bit of an issue with this servo that I glued in, which was a bit of a mistake, because of course I was thinking I could put the left hand fuselage side on by going this way, but of course once you get to the middle of the wing it's too big, so I had to put it on the normal way you would do it, and in the end I had to push the arm right forwards, and I just managed to get the plywood over there. It was a bit tight, but managed to get it over. But yeah, I wouldn't do that if I was doing another one. And then for the left hand wing, what I need to do is get this on like this, get my servo, get the lead through while it's easy enough to get it through. And then put this servo into position. Pull this back a bit now. And then I can feed the lead in. Oh, I did have to sand the wing holes in the fuselage side. I had to sand those a little bit because it was a bit too tight, but not too much. So there we go, that gets that lead in. And then we can slide this into position. So it's just a nice fit, it's just snug without being too tight. And then get this side lined up with the lines. That is exactly how I want it there, so that's just lined up. It's difficult to see because you can't really see the lines, but I can just see the outside edge of the line going down there. And now I'm going to do the same thing, so I'm just going to tack this fuselage side into place. And what I've done as well is I've used this sort of square block I've got and just push that up against there, so I know that it's square whilst I've been tacking it in. So I'll just do the same thing now. So I'm going to get this one tacked in with the CA, and then I'm going to get some epoxy mixed up and secure it in place a bit more permanently, and then we're on to the bandage then basically. The other thing I've done is I've mounted the aileron servo, so cut a hole in the wing, sorry, not the aileron, elevator servo, and then I've also recessed some of the ply bearers in there and I've glued those in place. So then I've just got to put some screws in to hold the servo in, so that's gone in quite nicely as well. So it's coming together good, I'm pretty pleased with it. So yeah, I'll get this CA'd in, and then that's the fuselage sides in position. Right then, fuselage is epoxied in place. That's all gone off, so I used 5-minute epoxy for that. I've also drilled a hole in the wings for the aileron cables to go through, so they come out on the top side, because I'm not going to be able to get to that bottom side, the bottom of the plane once the bottom sheeting's on. So all the radio gear is going to be in here, so I need the cables to come through there. So now we need to put the bandage on, and I've pre-cut this bandage to size already, and what I've done is I've just made a couple of slots in it for where the servo where the aileron servo goes, because I'm okay bandaging in over the hole that I've made because I can drill that back out, but trying to reopen the hole up when it's got epoxy glass resin over it is going to be tricky, so I decided I would just cut that piece out to make it a bit easier. So I got some nice Zap 30-minute epoxy, which I'm going to mix up to do this. Get the old gloves on because it's probably going to be a little bit messy. Some nice pink gloves, no less. And we'll get mixing the epoxy. So obviously, being 30-minute will give me plenty of time to work with it, which is good. Now I suppose I should really weigh this, shouldn't I? Otherwise I'm going to have no idea how much I've put in. So let's get the old scales out. Reset this. Okay, so that's on 0. Probably going to end up mixing too much. Okay, put the top back on that. Reset this to 0. And then let's go 8 grams of this. Okay, perfect. Then let's just switch that off, get that out of the way. Got myself a nice little mixer stick, and we'll get all that mixed together. And what I might do is put just a tiny little bit of this in, some alcohol. Just to thin it down a bit. That's plenty. Right, that's mixed up. So we'll start from the bottom. Because what I did was I had this here like this. I know you can't see that well. I think what I'll do as well is just use a brush for this, which obviously, I don't know why I just held that up to the camera, I'm sure you know what a brush is. Because this I'm going to have to throw away afterwards though, because this is going to be knackered. So let's start brushing this down. Right then, my memory card ran out of memory, so the camera switched off when I was halfway through doing that bandage, so apologies for that. But the bandage is on, the epoxy's going off, and since I mixed way too much epoxy up, as you always do in these sorts of scenarios, but I decided, I've checked the instructions, the next job after that's dried is to get the front former, the firewall, sorry, glued in place, and that requires epoxy as well, so I decided to use that epoxy to get this glued in place. Before I did that, I've just marked the holes on where my motor mount's going to go, just to make it a bit easier to drill it when that's ready. I've also got some little bits of triangle that was left over and just put those on the back and then brush those with epoxy, so that should be really nice and solid. And as you can see, I've got it clamped up here, and it's got the required down thrust, which is already set on the actual fuselage sides, and it also has just a touch of side thrust as well, so that should be ideal. So yeah, just got to leave it all to dry now. I mean, obviously I need to leave it overnight, and then I'll come back to it either tomorrow or the day after. Okay, so wings are on and epoxied in position with the bandage. So that's gone all the way around. I've cut the hole out in the bandage for the servos, nice and solid. So that's got that nicely. So now what I'm into is basically joining the fuselage. Getting the base on the fuselage and pulling the fuselage in. You'll also see that I've put the firewall in place already. Now bear in mind I'm doing this slightly different because I'm going electric, but the plans are geared up for, and the instructions are geared up for IC. I've already marked out my holes for the motor, so I thought I'd mark those while I've got it on the bench, and then I can easily just drill these out when I'm ready. I put some extra little bits of triangle in there. Not sure if you can really see that, it's a bit tricky. No, you're not going to be able to see that, but I've got some spare triangle that I had, and I've just put a couple of bits at the back of the former there and epoxied that in, so that's really nice and solid. So the next step is basically to sort of pull the fuselage in and get this bottom sheet on, which is a piece of 1/16 ply, so it's quite a flimsy piece really. And this is where the instructions I think get a little bit vague, or in my opinion they do, but maybe someone else they don't. But it doesn't really say much other than just to pull the back end in. It does give you a measurement, so it says about 16 to 17 mils at the back, but it doesn't really matter. I don't think it's whatever you sort of like the look of. Obviously it's got to be narrower than the bottom sheeting, otherwise then you're going to have a problem. So I've got mine set up around about 18, 19 mils at the back there, but it just says clamp the back so that you've got between 16 and 17 mils, and it doesn't mention anything about formers at all, but there is a set of formers in the instructions, and it does show you them on the plan as well. And actually on the cutting sheet, it mentions here, well, it's actually a battery locator, so it's actually a battery tray for the if you've got a little NiCad or whatever battery, if you were doing it IC, and it points to this little square here and it says sacrificial rear former, but there's no mention of the sacrificial rear former at all in the instructions. I'm sure that I've read it several times, I can't see anything about it. So what I've decided to do, although I'm doing mine electric so I don't need this battery tray, I am going to fit it, because it's actually a nice place for the receiver to go, I think. So that's why I'm going to fit mine, and of course it will give a bit of extra strength to the fuselage as well. So I'm going to fit mine. I'll show you what I've done in a minute. And then for the sacrificial former, what I've decided to do is it's just a square, and you kind of almost don't know where it goes either, unless it's meant to actually go on the back of the so sort of go straight on the back here, maybe, I don't know, but it doesn't say anything about it. And as I say, if it's sacrificial, that suggests that if it goes on the back you've got to take it off, whereas I know the normal one's got a hole in the back there for your push rods, etc., to come out. So what I've decided to do, because I'm going to be using some snake rather than push rod, because the push rod that you get supplied in the kits is this piece of dowel here, which obviously is meant to run down and out the back. I'm going to be using some snake, so I'm going to need some supports obviously on the way down, just to sort of make my snake nice and secure. So what I've decided to do is actually use that sacrificial former at the back, and I've just cut it in line with the triangle. So I've cut the corners off so it fits in between the triangle section and gives me a nice little former there, and I've positioned it just slightly in a bit, and that gives me about the right length, the widths, sorry, at the back there for the sheeting. So I've clamped that in place, and I'm going to CA that secure, and then I've done the same here for the battery tray. So I've sort of pre-assembled it, put that into place, clamped it using this, and then I'm going to run some CA in that to get it all secure. And then once that's done, I can then remove these clamps, and then we can start on this bottom sheeting. And I have checked it, and it's just right, so it's just slightly wider. Some parts are absolutely spot on, the same width more or less, because obviously I don't want too much overhanging, because it's, with it being ply, it's going to be reasonably tricky to sand. So once those two formers that I've done are dried, I'm then going to, it does say to epoxy this and then pull in the sides in where it needs to get it all lined up. And I think that will work. So first job is I want to just get some thin CA on this former, and I want to make sure that the former's flat, the fuselage sides are flat on my workbench, so I know that that's nice and square, which it is. I've also checked it as well, done a visual check down the length of the fuselage just to make sure that it is looking level and we've not got one side pulled in more than the other, which we haven't, and that looks nice and even. Same here as well, where that former is, it's nice and symmetrical there, because we don't want a wonky fuselage. So let's get some thin CA put into there. So that should secure that in place. I'll hold it down on the bench, keep it square, and then we'll do the same for this battery compartment. I'm just going to flip it over and do it from the other side. The only thing I will need to do is just sand this former down a bit, because it's just sticking up only a tiny bit. So I'll just sand that flush with the bottom of the fuselage. But I think we should be good to go there. Let's try taking this off. Okay, well, after I glued the formers in, I've now put the bottom sheeting on. So as you can see there, I've got it all taped up, clamped up, I've got weights on it, and I'm just going to leave that to dry overnight, and then we'll come back tomorrow and see how that's stuck down, and then I can start cutting it down to size, because I've got a huge overlap here at the front, so I need to cut that off there, and a fair bit at the tail as well. And then these sides are going to need sanding down, but we'll probably try and round the sides off a bit as well. So yeah, there we are. I'll show you what it looks like once it's dried and I've got all this tape off. Okay, well, it's been gluing overnight, so let's take these clamps off and get the tape off, and we'll see how it looks. Okay, that is looking nice and solid. Certainly strengthened it up nicely now. So next job is I've got to cut this back piece and obviously cut the nose, because that's massively oversized, and then some areas lined up absolutely perfect around in this sort of middle section, but then some bits, particularly obviously towards the tail, it's quite a bit wider, so I've just got to have a look at sanding that back, or because it's ply, so obviously it's not quite, I can't really plane it, I don't think. Probably gonna have to cut it with my knife and then sand it down. So I'm gonna get that done now. So for this back and the front bit, I'm just gonna use my razor plane. Okay, that's got that trimmed up. So now just got to do these bits. That's probably going to involve a lot of sanding, so I will get that done and show you how it looks. Right, well, that went really well. I was able to use the razor plane in the end. It did work quite well on the ply. I wasn't sure whether it would do it. I've probably sort of blunted the blade, but that's fine because I'll just replace it with a new one. But yeah, so got this all sanded up. Obviously with it being ply and ply, it's not like shaping bolts, so you can't, it's a lot harder to work with, but I've just put a slight profile on there just to sort of smooth the edges off, so it's not just a complete sharp square. It does say that in the instructions as well, just to put like a profile on it, so that all looks good. So that's obviously the bottom on now, so Next jobs I've got now is to, I think the next thing I'm going to do is put my snake in, ready for the elevator, and also put the elevator servo in, so I need to mount that in there. Then I've got to figure out what I'm doing with the battery tray, because obviously you'd normally have the fuel tank in the front here, but I'm going to be putting a 2200 3S LiPo in there, so I just need to offer that up and see how that's going to fit and sort a little tray out for that. And then we're on to putting the top on and then sort of finishing it off. So I think what I'm going to do is draw this video to a close now. So in the next video we'll get all those bits sorted. Also obviously got to get the tail on, so rudder and fin and horizontal stabilizer, get those on, and then we've got the final little bits to do like hinging and all that sort of stuff. So we'll see how far we get on the next video, but I might be into another 2 videos to finish it off, and then we've got the covering as well, which will be a separate video anyway. Hope you've enjoyed watching this one. If you've got any comments, stick them in the comments box below. If you're into bolts, then please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. You'd be doing me a massive favour if you could do that and help me out. And thanks for all those people who have already subscribed. And if you want to know when the next one's coming out, then click on the bell and YouTube will notify you when I release a new video. But in the meantime, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you soon for the next one.